This is Doug DeMuro, and today I want to talk about cars that I think are going up in value. I've made a few of these videos over the years, but it is probably the number one question people ask me when they see me. Hey, what should I buy that's going up in value? What do you think's going to increase? I do a lot of car stuff. I obviously also do cars and bids, the online car marketplace stuff. So I got a lot of knowledge of this part of the world. People are always asking me, so I figured I might as well do another one of these videos. It's been about 2 years. Let's talk about what cars are going up in value. Before we get started, are you ready for your next cool car? Sell your enthusiast car on Cars and Bids. Trading in your car to dealers means you aren't getting market value for your car, leaving you with less cash for your next fun car. Just look at our recent sales of these cool cars compared to current trade-in value. This is a trade-in offer, and this was the Cars and Bids result. This is a trade-in offer, and this was the Cars and Bids result. This is the trade-in offer, and this is the Cars and Bids result. Get started now on carsandbids.com. Sell on Cars and Bids and join the best community to sell your enthusiast car. Okay, cars going up in value. I want to give general thoughts here first. And my general thought on cars going up in value is not all that much. The car market absolutely shot up during COVID from mid-20 through like late 22 was kind of a crazy period in the car market. And that was a big run, especially for collector cars. There's a lot of stuff. You go back and look at sale prices and values in 1918, 20, which wasn't that long ago, and you're astonished that these cars were ever selling for these numbers compared to where they are now. I don't think after that massive quick run, I don't think a lot of stuff is really poised to shoot up going forward. But I do think there's obviously safer places to park your money in enthusiast cars, and I do think some cars will be at least outliers from the general car market. I don't necessarily know that they will outpace the stock market index funds, but I think that if the car market in general is doing this, there will always be cars that are doing this. So I guess this video is more about, what are those cars? What are the cars that are going to probably bring a little bit more value rise compared to the cars that aren't, I guess. So I'm going to start this video on the cheaper end. Now, most of the cars that are appreciating in value, just by nature, by definition, are the kind of collectible, exotic, enthusiast cars at the high end of the market, because those are the cars that typically go up. So most of this video, the later half, will be devoted to higher end, more expensive cars. But I get the sense when people are asking me this question, they're also specifically wondering about the stuff they can afford, stuff that's going to be more reasonably priced. Which of those cars are going up in value? So I'm going to start in that segment. Although for YouTube purposes, I should end in that segment so you watch the whole video. But I'm not going to do that because I don't care. Okay, on the cheaper end, on the more affordable end, cars going up in value, I strongly believe that you will see outsized value gains from some of the 90s and 2000s and maybe early 2010s, but mostly 90s and 2000s BMWs that are analog cars. So I would say specifically, if I'm calling out individual cars, the famous M Coupe, the Z3 M Coupe, and maybe the Z4 M Coupe, the E36 and E46 M3, and the E39 M5. I would say that those cars in particular are poised to increase better than the general car market for a few reasons. Number one, BMW in the years since these cars came out have changed. BMW is a very different brand than it was back then. They sell more cars now than they used to. They make more money now than they used to, but they are not the ultimate driving machine, driver-focused, enthusiast-focused brand that they were back in that era. And there's a lot of young people in their 20s and 30s who are coming up, getting good jobs, getting into money now, that are able to afford some of the BMWs that they knew from this nostalgic period of their childhood when that was what BMW was about, when the ultimate driving machine, the best drivers' cars was BMW's focused. And a lot of these people, and I'm included in this sort of age demographic, a lot of these people fondly looked at those cars like, wow, these are so exciting. Someday I'll be able to get one of those, assuming that we would buy the new BMW at the time when we got to this age. But now those new BMWs are different. They're not the same cars as they used to be. And so I think that will cause these older BMWs to rise in value. And particularly another big reason I think they're going to go up in value is because nice ones are becoming really hard to find. And this is a reason that a lot of cars like this go up in value anyway, is there's massive attrition. There were a lot of E36 M3s turned into driftmobiles and crashed. There were a lot of E46 M3s that were stupidly modified with stance and carbon lips and all this stuff. There were a lot of E39 M5s that had similar stuff, or they were driven into the ground. And a lot of those cars, it'll be the nice ones that rise in value. It will not be the ratty ones. They will probably always stay in their price range. But the nice ones are the ones that the enthusiast, the modern enthusiast, is going to be looking at to bring them back to the childhood that they remembered from BMW. Oh, wow, here's a 20,000 mile E39 M5. I cannot have the experience of this car anymore from any new car, but I can get this very pristine one and relive what it would have been like for it to be a new car. And I think you're going to see these BMWs specifically rising in value. Now, interestingly, I do not feel the same way about Mercedes-Benz and Audi. I think that enthusiasts from this era that I'm discussing, the 20s and 30s age groups, do not have the same nostalgia factor for Mercedes-Benz and Mercedes-AMG cars. There are some Mercedes models from this era that will increase in value. I think some AMG models like the W210 E55 probably will go up in value, maybe the 211 E55, but not as much as the BMWs. These cars were not the poster cars, the dream cars of the younger crowd. They never quite attained that status, and obviously they're not the driving enthusiast cars. In addition, they just are more common. It's easier to find a nicer Mercedes from this era. They weren't modded as much. They weren't driven as hard. They were often owned by more mature owners. And so you're generally going to be able to find these cars in nicer shape in general, which makes them less, exciting when you come across a nice one that sort of brings you back to the nostalgia piece. In terms of Audi, I think Audi in this era was always a bit more of a niche brand. And I think that a lot of car enthusiasts, there were people into Audis, primarily people who lived in cold climates in the north, Illinois, Ohio, the New England, Colorado. The B5 S4 is king for me as a kid from Colorado. I dream of that car deeply, but a lot of other enthusiasts, that really never became a big thing until later, the R8 and cars like that in the late 2000s and 2010s. So I think Audi doesn't necessarily fit into this world. I think this is kind of a unique thing to BMW. The 90s and 2000s cars in really nice shape, I think, are going to have a big value rise. Now, another car that I think from the relatively affordable end of the segment that's going to rise in value, 981 and 991 Porsche 911 models, and specifically special versions of these cars that are particularly desirable and appealing. So that would be the GT4, that would be the Boxster Spider, that would be the 911, let's call it the GTS, and the Targa with manual transmissions. I think one of the things I'm discovering about Porsches is that the way the chips are falling, it generally seems to be older guys get the air-cooled stuff. The 996 remains kind of maligned, unfairly, but maligned. The 997, a lot of people loved. However, there are a lot of complaints about the interior, and that car will always be dogged by the IMS situation and some reliability complaints. I think at 991, Porsche put it all together. They had, at the beginning, a naturally aspirated engine. They had a beautiful car. They had a modern interior. They had excellent modern-day performance. That car really combined everything. And an early 991, the first year was 2012. The car is not that old yet, but I think as time goes on, the special ones, the Targas and the manual transmission S's with nice options, those are going to be cars that are desired. Maybe not quite like a 993, which is sort of seen as the pinnacle air-cooled car, but I would say in a kind of similar way. Before Porsche went on to electrification, overproduction of automatic transmissions, hybrid, that sort of stuff. I think 991 kind of is the end, especially 991.1 is kind of the end of that. And I think that those cars probably will have pretty significant rises in value, the very right versions with the manuals, with the right powertrains as they age. In 10, 15 years, I could see the 991 market very much surpassing even the 992 market, but kind of sitting up there at the top of the Porsche echelon with 993s as sort of like kind of the dream Porsche from its era. Now, with those in mind, those are the relatively affordable cars. We move on now. We're talking about cars going up in value. Move on to sort of more collector grade cars. And there's a few specific ones that I'm surprised haven't risen more, starting with probably my number one, which is older Lamborghinis. When I say older Lamborghinis, I'm not necessarily referring to the Miura or the Countach. I think the Countach still has a way to go in terms of climbing in value. The Miura is probably topped out. Nice cars sell for $2 million. I suspect the Countach will someday get there, especially as the word continues to get out about how wonderful they all are. I love mine dearly. It has not climbed significantly yet, but I do expect it to get there. But it's less about those cars, which are already expensive. You know, this is a $600,000 car. Certain Countachs are over $1 million. Miras are over $2 million. I'm more talking about the Diablo Murcielago cars. Lamborghini production was really limited until the Aventador, and I am continuously surprised when I look at sales results for Diablos and Murcielagos, just how affordable those cars are relative to where I think they should be. Lamborghini made about 1,000 Miras, 2,000 Countachs, 3,000 Diablos, and 4,000 Murcielagos. They're all very rare. Murcielagos, to me, it is astonishing you can pick one up for $200,000. That is the price now of a nicely optioned new Porsche 911. And you can get a Murcielago for the same money, and that won't last. I mean, we've already seen Miras go from $300,000 to $2 million, Countachs from $75,000 to $700,000. You can see where those early Lambos are starting to rise. You know that Diablo and Murci will not be holding in the $200,000 to $400,000 range forever. It is pretty easy to find a Murci for $200,000. I think it will still be for the next 5 years. I think 10, 15 years down the line, Murci becomes a much more valuable car. Murci is in a special area where it combines modern technology, modern reliability, and modern performance with an old school analog Lamborghini feel with the old V12. Diablo, same kind of deal. It's a little bit more old school, but it still has an Italian designer, more or less, and it still has some of the specialness of the Countach. And those two cars, I think, have a lot of room to climb in value, and I'm surprised they haven't yet, but I suspect they will. I also think that older Lambos will continue to become more valuable as a broader segment of the market kind of gets into those cars. If you talk to the old guys who are into exotic cars, Ferrari is the thing. That Ferrari was the brand. That's just what it was. And they never even considered Lamborghinis. In their era, their generation viewed Lamborghinis as a drug dealer's car, that kind of thing. Like it wasn't a serious vehicle. Younger people don't feel that way. Younger people who have been exposed their whole lives to Huracan, to Gallardo, to Lamborghini being a mainstream exotic car brand, now start looking back at the historic stuff in awe. And I think that will continue to increase. Like, you don't talk to young people don't distinguish that much between Lambo and Ferrari and McLaren. Older guys do, and it was older guys for a long time driving the market for these cars, which is why Ferraris got to be so valuable. I think Lamborghinis are playing catch up, and they will continue to play catch up over the next 5-10 years. And I think Murci and Diablo play a big role there. Another car that I think is undervalued in the same vein of these old school Lambos, the Ferrari 430 Scuderia, I think is radically undervalued for what it is. And I've often considered getting one. The 430 Scuderia was the high performance version of the F430, which was already a great car. But the cool thing about the Scud was it took things to a totally new level. It was lowered, it had no sound deadening, it was faster, it was more powerful, it was a really excessive and exciting car. And they didn't make that many of them. There was a convertible version too. But for some reason, the market has never really deemed the 430 Scuderia to be as special as its predecessor, the 360 Challenge Stradale, which I never really agreed with. The Stradale is the rarer car between the two, but the 430 Scud is also rare and more exciting, more insane, more faster, just a total craziness in terms of getting hit in the face with like power and speed and sound. And I just love the 430 Scuderia, and I love what it can do and what it is. And I've always kind of felt that car is undervalued, and I think that remains true in the 200,000 some value range. I don't understand why those cars haven't come up. I think they probably deserve to come up, and I think that's a very special car. That probably continues to still rise. It's a special modern Ferrari, again, that combines sort of an analog feel with modern performance. And I think any car that can do that is really special. You have a lot of cars that do analog feel, but they're slow. You have a lot of cars that do modern performance, but they're modern with touchscreens and dual clutch transmissions. Any car that combines the two is, I think, a special car going forward. And another good example of that is also the Ferrari 550 Maranello, which I also think has a long way to go in terms of value. The 550 Maranello and the 575, honestly, front engine V12 Ferraris that were made from like 97 through 2005. Basically, the 550 Maranello, they were all manual transmission. The 575, they were basically all automatic. There are manuals, but they're quite rare. And manual 575s are already very valuable. Either one, I think, is a very cool car. A manual, the The 550 is very special. I am surprised what they sell for. Particularly, I think the Euro cars are a bargain. The U.S. market, for whatever reason, really does not highly value Euro Ferrari 550 Maranellos that have been imported. But those cars are 25 years old now. They're fully legal to import. They are not particularly different from U.S. cars. They drive about the same, and I think they are a total bargain in today's market. But even U.S. cars are bargains, even as they start to crest the $250,000 price point. These are very, very, very desirable cars. V12 front engine, it feels like the Ferrari Daytona from the modern era. And I think that is doubly true for the 575, which is a better car than the 550 in every area, in my opinion. It's more reliable. I think it looks better. It's more powerful. And it suffers from the fact that they were all automatics. But now that manual swaps have become so common, I think the move is you buy a 575 for 100 to 120, which is all they sell for, total bargains. You swap the transmission and then you just enjoy the car, and I bet you will never really lose in that car. I think the market on those will continue to rise as the market continues to appreciate how special they are. And finally, the last car I want to talk about, rising in value. This is one I'm actually surprised by. I never thought I would talk about the 2005 to 2006 Ford GT. And I admit I own one of these cars. I don't necessarily consider myself biased here, in part because I didn't expect these cars would have a big run. They went up during COVID like everything else. I got mine years ago and paid $225 for it. I think mine is a $375 car now. Values have gone up. I'm not surprised values went up from $225. What has surprised me, though, is even beyond the COVID run, if you look at the curve of Ford GT results, they are continuing to rise faster than almost any other enthusiast car. Well, 2 years ago, when I bought my Countach, I expected the Countach rise to continue, and it has. I would say my Countach is probably up maybe 15% in value since I bought it 2 years ago. But the Ford GT is up way more than that, probably 35% since then. I have been astonished watching the Ford GT market. I'm not sure what is driving it. I'm not sure why that car specifically has taken off so much, but we are now seeing low mileage Ford GT heritage models cresting $800,000 in a market where the new Ford GT, which is much rarer and which was much more expensive new, is starting to come down below $800,000 or into that range. And so you're starting to see the old Ford GT eclipse the new one. And I predicted that that would happen a few months ago, but I didn't really think it was going to happen this soon. And even ratty old Ford GTs, 05s, which used to be sub 200 cars if they've been in an accident or had body work, that is gone. You cannot find one anywhere near that price point anymore. The market on those cars has really risen in a way that I am completely shocked by. I completely took me off guard. I always expected they would continue to rise alongside every other, collectible enthusiast car. I didn't think they would have an outsized run. And again, I'm not sure what's contributing to it right now, other than it's an analog car, but there's a lot of analog cars that are not having their own outsized run. So I'm not entirely sure why this particular car at this particular time is going up so high, but it is. And there's no doubt the Ford GT market has totally taken off. And if you were sitting on the sidelines of Ford GT wanting one when they were $250, high mileage cars are still $350, and I have a suspicion this will be the last chance to get one of those cars at that number, which is pretty impressive considering a production run of about 4,000 units, same as Murcielago. And with that in mind, the last thing I want to say in terms of cars that I think are going to go up in value is generally special cars from the 90s and 2000s that have had low production runs. And I want to clarify this because low production run, I think now means something totally different than it did 25 years ago. In the 80s and 90s, low production runs, early 90s, low production run would mean maybe 200 or 300 units. The Ferrari 288 GTO with 272 unit production run. The Porsche 959 with a 300 unit production run. Those were rare cars in their era. These days, automakers do not make cars in production runs that low anymore because it is not economically viable to do so. You've sometimes seen 20-unit production runs of like the new Lamborghini Countach or whatever, but typically that's just a rebodied version of an existing car. You will never really find an automaker creating an entirely new vehicle for a 300-unit production run. And I think what's going to happen is the auto market is going to start to see that a 1,000 or a 2,000 or a 3,000 unit production run is rare by the standards of the 90s and 2000s, and they will start to value those cars like the 300 unit production runs of the 70s, 60s, and 80s. What is looked at now is the Ford GT, they made a lot of cars at 4,000. Or the Mercedes SLR, they made a lot of cars at 2,200 or whatever it was. I think in 25 years, you're going to look back and say, wow, those are actually really rare cars, because now a typical production run for a rear car can be 3,000 or 4,000 units. And I think that that will continue to increase dramatically. And I think that people are going to look back and look at the production runs of some of the BMW Z8s and the SLRs as very, very rare and special cars in comparison with what's coming with more mass production and fewer, bespoke analog type cars like that. So I think basically any 90s, 2000s car could potentially have an increase in value if it has a low production run, and not just, it has a wing and it's a special version of a normal car, but like a true low production car like the Z8, like the Ford GT, the Carrera GT, cars like that I think could continue to see rises as the market starts to realize that the days of a 300 unit production run car are over. So those are my thoughts. That's what I think is going up in value this year, and not this year, but over the coming years. And I'm curious to see how it all actually shakes down. It's hard to predict. There was a time, I think, where it was a little bit easier to predict what was going to shoot up. And COVID, then a lot of stuff people got especially interested in it. It kind of seems like the market is pretty inflated right now. And it's hard to imagine stuff will continue to rise. But obviously in any market, some stuff goes up more than others. And I guess we'll find out exactly what that is. And we'll find out over time if I was right.